Now, there's a number of questions, I think, already in the chat about what sort of resources and supports there are for helping you as a GP to work with people from different cultures, people who may not speak English, Aboriginal patients, refugee groups. Madan, what can doctors expect in Australia in terms of support for those type of situations?
As far as the support in regards to, especially each and every state, they tend to have like separate resources. Say, for example, like if it is in Victoria, it is a Better Health Channel Victoria. So there are like resources like which are available, and again in RACGP website, like especially in GP learning, there are like few modules which talks about like the resources, different resources like which are available. And again, we do have each and every state, and there is a federally controlled language interpretation services like which we could use. And a lot of hospitals, they do have their own interpretation service, like for depending on the demographics where the hospital is located. Say, for example, in Melbourne, like in Western area, where there is a significant like Vietnamese population, the hospital itself has like a Vietnamese translator. And as far as like Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, like there are separate resources, like including a liaison officer who will be available like in the hospital or like in the local health region. So essentially navigating through the state health website is the good starting point for accessing these resources. And in addition to that, like as I mentioned, like there are federal websites like which gives access to these resources as well. Thank you.
Right. Aunty Nellie, Madan mentioned Aboriginal liaison officers, and there's also Aboriginal health workers. Could you just talk a little bit about the sort of key support workers that might be available for Aboriginal people in the health system that GPs may come across?
Yes, we have Aboriginal health workers within the medical field over here, and they generally work within Aboriginal health services. And so if you decide you want to do Aboriginal health, there are specifically Aboriginal health services that you can go and work in. And within that, they have Aboriginal health workers that can assist you with any questions in regards to Aboriginal culture. And within the hospitals, they have Aboriginal liaison officers. And again, they're specifically in the hospitals and other resources, like the justice system and a lot of other things that have lots of other things, that relate to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. They can also help you, and you need to be aware. And the service that you go into, they also need to be aware. And one of the things that most services that may have a connection with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, what they have is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultural awareness. And that's where, they're responsible to ensure that their staff that they have are aware of particularly different cultures within their area. And they have to, make sure that their staff can also work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And through those cultural awareness sessions, this is an opportunity for you to ask the questions that you don't know.
Yes. So, for example, we've had some questions in the chat about female doctors discussing men's problem with Aboriginal men, or whether it's okay to maintain eye contact with an Aboriginal person or not. Again, there are, these are things that come up sometimes, aren't they? But it's
Yeah.
best to get the local knowledge and find out what the local custom is. That's what you're saying, is?
That's so right.
Yeah.
Because I can sit here and tell you something, but it won't be relevant to particular areas and particularly countries. When I talk about countries, Australia was made up before white people came to Australia. Australia was made up only by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. That's maybe a picture that could be shown that of the map of Australia with all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities across Australia and Tasmania.
Yeah.
And it's important for you to understand, that if I tell you something here in Victoria, it may be not right up in Torres Strait Islander area, because they do things differently to us. And so, and you need to understand why they still do things differently to us down here in Victoria. And again, it's about it's directly related to the colonisation of this country and the invasion of this country.
Yep.
So it's, again, what you could do is read stuff that is online, and write notes down about what you want to know. And you need to understand, why do you want to know it, and understand it.
I've just popped that map of Australia with the various Aboriginal countries in the chat for people, so they might want to have a look at that. There's hundreds, I think, on there. So I think it just emphasizes the fact that I think it's not one Aboriginal nation. It's a large number of different countries and tribes and communities that formed part of Australia before it was colonized by the Europeans without approval. I think is the
certainly without approval.
Without approval.
Can I just say, see my background?
Yeah.
The reason I left that up tonight was simply because that is my traditional country. That's up around Swan Hill, so that's Wamba country, and around that's a lake, like that's called Lake Boga behind me, and that's a very significant area for us, because a lot of Aboriginal people lived around that. We lived near water, because it was, you need water to live, but it also had a source of food. So a lot of Aboriginal people lived around that Lake Boga, and that's why I left it up, so you would have some sort of understanding. And that's just a relation to one of my countries. That's like I said, that's Swan Hill, and if you go down the road about an hour and almost 2 hours, you end up at Bendigo, which is another country town. It's a quite big country town, and that's Jajarang, and that's also my country on my mother and my grandfather's side. And coming down to Melbourne on the southern side of Melbourne, it's my country again. My family traditional country is Bunurong. So you need to understand how people connect to country. It's really important, because people, if you have some knowledge of what the names of Aboriginal communities are, or countries are, people will think, oh, well, he or she has done some homework and understand a bit about Aboriginal culture. And that is a great way of breaking down barriers and showing that you're showing the respect that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have. Now, you won't find Torres Strait Islander people have country down here in Victoria. Their countries are up north, up around, you know, the Northern Territory, over in Queensland. And so you need to understand where the Torres Strait Islander people come into it and communities come into it too.
Right.
I know I know it's a big thing to get your head around, but you know, you just slowly need to chip at it and understand yourself.